Alright, well, I did this once already last night, but for some fucking reason the video decided to fuck up on me, and at the very last chunk it stopped working, the audio went out. And what I'm doing here is my least favorite films of 2012. Um, I did both my best and worst of last night, but both of the videos for some reason didn't turn out very well. I don't know why, but it just fucked up on me. So now here I am the next night doing it again. Hopefully this time it'll work out. I'm going to keep this a little bit shorter. The other video was like about 40 minutes long. I'm going to try and keep this under 20 minutes, hopefully, so I don't have to split it into more than two parts. So let's get started at number 6. I only have 6 movies that I thought were that I didn't really care for that much. Um, so this is going to be a lot shorter than my best stuff. At number 6, we have Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning. I saw this movie on HDNet, which is it's a movie channel that I have, where every once in a while, on Wednesday nights, they will air a sort of smaller, independently released film. As soon as it hits, I guess, video on demand and pay-per-view, they'll air it. They'll show it 3 times on Wednesday night, and I recorded it. I recorded Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning because I figured, well, I can watch it on my TV. I don't have to download it or anything like that. I don't have to buy the DVD. I can just watch it like that. I saw it, and I will say this. It's a good action movie, but it's a shitty Universal Soldier movie because it really does mess with some of the elements of the other films. Now, I have not seen Universal Soldier Regeneration. I had no interest in seeing that because I heard a lot of bad things. I heard it was awful. After seeing this, I don't know if I'd go back and watch that. Now, what I mean by this being a good action movie and a shitty Universal Soldier movie, which is why it's at number 6. It's a little bit lower on the list. First of all, the first 45 minutes, it's all build up. You have the setup. Scott Adkins, he plays our main character. Wakes up one night, and this opening sequence is done from the first person perspective. You see everything from his point of view. He wakes up one night because his daughter says she sees monsters in the house. He goes around looking, and then eventually he runs into a bunch of guys with masks, one of which is Van Damme. Van Damme takes off the mask. He shows himself to Scott Adkins, and again, everything is from his point of view, and he orders the other men, who of course are other Unisouls, to kill Scott Adkins' wife and daughter. And then he gets pretty much the shit beat out of him, and he was in a coma for a while. He wakes up, and he embarks on this quest to find Luke Devereaux, who now is a bad guy, and the other Unisouls, one of which is also Andrew Scott, played by Dolph Lundgren. Now, this movie has absolutely nothing to do with any of the other Universal Soldier films. It's pretty much a standalone movie, but it features characters from the other films, Luke Devereaux and Andrew Scott. For the first 45 minutes, it is all build up, trying to figure out what's going on, where Luke Devereaux is, and the other Unisouls and stuff like that. We're introduced Andre the Pitbull Alarski. He's in this one. I know he was in the first one. Here, he doesn't have any dialogue. He doesn't say a damn thing. He pretty much just lumbers around. At first, he's working for the government. He's a Unisoul, a sleeper, as they say, who is sort of just living a normal life as a plumber until he's reactivated by the government to go after the other Unisouls. And he goes after, first, Dolph Lundgren, Andrew Scott, who's at like this whorehouse. I assume it's a whorehouse, because it's a bunch of hookers and shit like that. And Dolph Lundgren's there, and Andre Arlovsky goes in there with a shotgun, pretty much kills everybody. And I will say this, though, about the movie, why it's at number 6. The action, when it shows up, is really good. It's practical, it's brutal, it's bloody. The film is really bloody. It's definitely a hard R movie. When people get shot, you get practical blood squibs. There's limbs getting hacked off. It's all practical, which I appreciated. I will give it that. It had some great practical effects. And when Andre Larcy gets to Dolph eventually kicks his ass and injects him with something. And this is something I absolutely did not like. John Hyams uses this fucking strobe effect. And if you have, I think it's called narcolepsy, or no, not narcolepsy. That's the sleeping disorder. Epilepsy. You will have a seizure if you see this movie. So I would avoid it because the strobe effect is done at least 3 or 4 times, if I'm not mistaken, and it usually happens when people get injected with this shit. It's basically so that when Andrei Arlovsky gets injected by Dolph with this chemical, he's now freed from the control of the government. And when the strobe effect happens, which is what they see, Van Damme's head shows up like in the middle, and he says something like, "Free your mind" or something like that. I don't really remember. But now they're no longer controlled by the government. Now they're, I guess, free thinkers, but they're still sort of, working for Van Damme. And like I said, the action is well done. Scott Adkins does what he can with what he's given to work with. Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, they're barely in it. They're in it 10, 15 minutes at most. They don't really do much of anything until like the very end. And of course, as the movie progresses, you find out Scott Adkins himself is a Unisoul, because earlier he gets into a fight with Andrei Arlovsky, where Andrei Arlovsky comes in and sort of chops off his fingers. And then later on, Scott Adkins removes like these bandages he had on, and his fingers grew back. Which I didn't know the Unisouls could do that. They never said, and I know this is a standalone movie, but in the other films, they never said that the Unisouls could regrow limbs. Did they? I don't remember them establishing that. And also another thing about the Unisouls, they die really easily in this film. They get shot a couple times, they'll go down. Later on in the movie, Scott Adkins has another fight with Andrei Arlovsky inside the sporting goods store, which was actually a good fight. I will say this, the action, the fight sequence, it's all well shot. And Scott Adkins basically beats Andrei Arlovsky to death. He just hits him in the head with a baseball bat really hard, and that kills him. And I thought the only way to kill a Unisoul was to sort of blow them up, so that their body was completely destroyed. And here, there's also no mention of like that green chemical from the first film. Well, that wasn't in Universal Soldier: The Return either. But Universal Soldier: The Return, to be honest, that's a much better movie. That's a better Universal Soldier movie, even if they don't reference that green chemical shit. That's not in this either. So, and again, they don't really go into the whole plot very well. The Universal Soldiers, their plan, they never really go into that. You never really know what Luke Devereaux wants, what they're planning on doing. Are they going to overthrow the government? They never explain any of that. It's all about Scott Adkins trying to get to the Unisouls. And, it does sort of rip off stuff from Apocalypse Now. If you saw the trailer, because you get that thing where Van Damme's head is half white and half black. I believe Marlon Brando does that in Apocalypse Now. I don't know. I've actually never seen Apocalypse Now. But I think he does that. And, again, they never explain what exactly their real plan is, but I will say this. The action, when it's there, it's well done. Like I said, it's R-rated. The blood is practical. The gore effects are practical. And the finale, I thought, was actually a lot of fun. There's a scene where Scott Adkins does finally get to the compound where the other Unisouls are. And there's a scene where he runs into, there's this other scientist there with the Unisouls, and he says, I can help you get rid of the memories of your family so that you don't have to suffer anymore. Scott Adkins says yes, and they start drilling into his head. But as they're doing that, he remembers his family, and he realizes, no, he doesn't want to forget them, and then he just goes ape shit, and just sort of comes off this what the fuck are they called in a hospital? I guess from this bed where they're drilling into his head. He just gets up from it, and I guess he still has a hole in his head because his head is bleeding, and he just fucks everybody up left and right, goes to the compound, kills everybody. He has actually a pretty awesome fight with Dolph that's pretty graphic, and in that fight you get to hear Dolph say his line from the original film, that's the spirit, soldier. And Dolph gets actually a pretty graphic death. He gets stabbed with a machete underneath his chin, and it comes out through the top of his head. And then, of course, you get the final battle between Scott Adkins and Van Damme, which was a decent fight. I would say it's better than the fight they had in The Shepherd. But the way it ends was stupid. Scott Adkins is going to stab Van Damme with a machete, and Van Damme stops it, but then he just lets go, and he says, doesn't matter if you kill me, there's always somebody else. So Scott Adkins stabs Van Damme and kills him, turns around, and there's a bunch of other Unisouls watching him. And then at the end of the movie, he goes to meet this other guy that we saw earlier, this guy who worked for the government who's also tracking down Luke Devereaux, who we saw at the beginning of the film, and then never again until the ending. And Scott Adkins says, everyone who's responsible for my family's death has to be brought to justice. He pulls out a gun, and the guy says, I didn't kill your family, Luke Devereaux did. Scott Adkins goes, maybe, but you put him up to it. And he kills him. And then these other Unisouls, who we saw earlier, they come out of the van, they pick up the guy's body, put him into this van, and Scott Adkins and the other Unisouls drive away. So what? Now Scott Adkins is the bad guy? Now he's going to lead the Unisouls to do whatever the fuck they were planning on doing? Again, they never explain what exactly the Unisouls want, what their big plan is. They never explain that. And that's what's wrong with this movie. The story, the script is just bad. It's a shitty Universal Soldier movie, but I have to admit, the action sequences when they're there are actually really good. But even if whether you like or don't like Scott Adkins' character, I kind of liked his character in this. At the very end, because they want to imply that he's going to be a bad guy now, there's no rewatchability. What's the point of even watching this again? Number one, Van Damme and Lundgren, nothing to do. The story, they never explain anything. I will admit, it takes about 45 minutes to an hour for the action to finally kick in. I mean, when it shows up, like I said, the action is really good. And I actually don't think John Hyams is a bad director as much as he's a shitty writer. And if he does any more movies, do something else. Just stop making Universal Soldier movies. Okay? Just stop, because you're fucking up this franchise. You are fucking up this franchise. And at the end, like I said, they're trying to imply that Scott Adkins is now the villain. He's now a bad guy. He's going to lead the Unisouls to do whatever the fuck it was they were going to do. And there's no rewatchability there. You know, you watch it the second time around, well, what's the point of rooting for Scott Adkins if he's just going to become a bad guy at the end? I think. I guess that's what happened. Again, I don't know. So, the action is where this movie excels. It's just, the script is not very good. But the action is great. It just belongs in a better movie. And John Hyams, I have to admit, I thought the directing was fine. The action was well shot. It was well edited. It was well choreographed. It was violent. It was brutal. Honestly, I think, to be honest, it probably had better action than Expendables 2, which is really sad. I still like Expendables 2 better than this. I mean, action or no action, I thought that script was a little bit better. But I'll get to Expendables 2 on my other list. So number 6, Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning. I went into a lot of detail with that one because I really needed a little bit of time to explain that. At number 5, it's another Van Damme movie. I don't even know if it came out this year. I didn't bother to check. But it's 6 Bullets. This is sort of the opposite of Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning. The script, I think, is a little bit better because it's a much simpler plot. But the action is kind of lacking. When the action is there, it's okay. It's well done. It's directed by the same guy who did Assassination Games, which I didn't see, but I heard it was pretty bad. 6 Bullets, I thought if there was just a little bit more action, it would have been a better movie. I know Van Damme's old. I can't expect him to be roundhouse kicking forever.